I'm David Bank, and from Impact Alpha, this is an Agents of Impact podcast.
I'm trying to, as Eric said, broaden the tent, find coalition with more folks, and kind of get things done, even if that means using silly terms like energy dominance from time to time.
That's Lucas Turner-Owens, co-host of the Impact Ed podcast. Lucas and his co-host Eric Horvath have released season 2 of the show. They're having lively conversations with guests from across the impact landscape, from community development financial institutions to venture capitalists to institutional asset allocators. I caught up with Lucas and Eric to get the backstory. We talked about the pendulum swing in the conversation, from the business case for impact investing to economic justice and fundamental values, and back again, and about how to broaden the tent for more people to move capital for good. Let's jump into our conversation. Eric and Lucas, welcome to the Agents of Impact podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Lucas, you're actually an original Agents of Impact. We've sat down in the offices in Boston of Ujima 6 or 7 years ago and profiled the work you were doing. Here we are again. And so it's great to connect with you. And, let's just maybe start off by maybe drawing the connection from Ujima to the work now. Ujima was always kind of the icon or the example of real kind of community-centered impact investing, participatory governance, and a kind of democratizing of impact. I don't know what you want to say. Where do we stand on that trajectory now of impact investing?
Well, I'll say some things change and some things stay the same. I think, I stepped into that work during the first Trump presidency, and unfortunately now we're back in that reality again. But a lot has changed in terms of how I view the impact investing landscape. I think what felt more at the margins then became more dominant in the zeitgeist in 2020. So people using terms like BIPOC, in the mainstream. I never thought that was going to happen from the kind of more fringe, more leftist conversations I was having with the Ujima crew back then. But just as sort of a marker of time, I also remember when the Fearless Fund lawsuit happened at the Supreme Court level, where folks were saying it's actually reverse discrimination to invest in Black women. And in that moment, I had left Ujima. I was in business school. I was thinking about what I wanted to do with the next chapter of my career. And what I was also learning simultaneously was that LPs, investors in venture funds, I was curious about venture, cared a lot about edge, like where can you specifically help them get an edge in a certain sector? And that led me to want to become more of a sector specialist. So I started looking through the lens of climate tech and thinking about different industries that I could potentially focus on, hoping to avoid the kind of eye of Sauron of maybe these anti-DEI lawsuits, just to find out that nothing is safe. I mean, now we're in a moment where there are tariffs on solar panels, and we're in a whole new moment. And as a climate tech VC, I now see that you can't find safe harbor. You should probably just do what you care about. And I've been fortunate that I've joined a firm where I'm really lucky to work with really exciting founders who are solving issues tied to climate change and climate justice. But it's been an interesting path navigating these different pieces of the impact landscape.
Yeah, well, that's a good jumping off point because, as you say, there is kind of this pendulum that swings in many ways in impact. And you guys are having a terrific run of conversations on the Impacted podcast with folks, in different parts of the ecosystem. And Eric, I just wonder, sort of how you're sort of seeing in a general way, as you sort of think back on the conversations of season 1 and now season 2, how folks are kind of navigating the cross currents that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I think the kind of comment of the things change, but they stay the same. And then also the tent is quite large, is a lot of the reason why, we brought on folks that represent that serve on committees advising pension funds around ESG, who do impact VC, who work at CDFIs. So the thing that I think we really notice across both of the seasons and the dozen or so conversations that we've had is that regardless of kind of the political times, or regardless of the swing from like the business case around impact or responsible investing to the kind of more impact first part of the kind of capital spectrum, just at the end of the day, there's just a large contingent of people, and increasingly more so, that are really just focused on how do we move resources and capital more for good. and that's not so much focused on one sleeve or sliver of the industry, and it's not really contingent on what year it is or where the political winds are. I feel like that's really representative in the guests that we've had on and the kind of roles that they hold.
I always think in the impact world, a light bulb goes off. Oh, finance can be used for more than just, making returns, and that there can be, tools that are applied to certain, issue areas or challenges as well. But the way that people talk about it does change. And you mentioned the business case, for example, and I think we're feeling that people are now leaning back into the business case in a way because it gets to sort of the fundamentals, it gets to material factors that affect their investments, it gets to risk mitigation and other things, and maybe it's a safer conversation to have than maybe the sort of justice based or conversation or values based conversation that Lucas, you mentioned, was sort of top of mind a few years ago. So you think people are changing the way they talk about it, if not the way they actually operate?
Yeah, my personal read is that there are some really solid business cases to be made, right? You think about a technology like solar energy, which is objectively cheaper to provide electrons than gas in many markets. Or if you think about racial equity investing, this fact, which is that we're going to have a country that is majority POC soon, and they're going to need products and services that serve them. So there are real strong business cases to be made. There's also a way in which folks are kind of code switching how they have the values conversation. So in a category like solar, I'm seeing folks use language like energy dominance. We need energy dominance, right, to appeal to the Trump administration. Uh, I guess I'm of the mindset that we need to let many flowers bloom. I think a good example of this would be like if you're thinking about impact investing in a category like real estate, you can have a community wealth building strategy where you invest directly in a multifamily asset and you see some sort of appreciation, like 5 to 8% return. Or as a renter in a affordable housing complex, you could also just invest in an index fund and just maybe get an 8% plus return, but it's not quite as symbolic, not quite as impactful. So like I, all those strategies are good. They're all valid. Um, I think, yeah, we're in a moment where I'm trying to, as Eric said, broaden the tent, find coalition with more folks and kind of get things done. Even if that means using silly terms like energy dominance from time to time.
Yeah, David, I think it's an interesting question around is it more style or substance? Just in terms of like as the pendulum swings, is it people are communicating and talking about things differently, and does that also translate to substantively their investment theses, strategies, kind of approvals, and what they're diligencing, how they operate? Is that fundamentally changing? And just from my kind of vantage point, and I sit on a variety of investment committees, do investing, teach, just do a variety of things across the capital spectrum. I would say, from my personal perspective, I don't think the substantive conversation has changed dramatically in terms of like now all of a sudden we care about the business case. Like the thing that I always kind of remind people that maybe are more skeptical or newer to the space is I remind them that the word investing is in the terms impact investing, responsible investing, sustainable finance. Like finance and investing are core to this term and this discipline. And of course, people are responding to the current political climate, current circumstances. But I've always felt that there, in the vast majority of the big tent we're talking about, there has always been a strong business case or an ambition to have one because it is an investing discipline. Uh, and to my point around our guests and just the how many people want to do move capital for good, like I see that fervor just as strong as ever as well.
Yeah, yeah. I want to make sure that listeners know that there's another terrific podcast on the impacted side of you two, sort of talking about your own personal trajectories and journeys with our friend Rodney Foxworth, who you both worked with, and so for the more personal background and kind of journey, I think folks should listen to that. But maybe if you can telescope that, Eric, and take us kind of through, because you made the good point that the kinds of things you thought about at Transform Finance, the kinds of things you thought about at Common Future, community governance, community involvement, actually are there's a business case for that. It just to go back to those things actually add value to investments that even big institutional investors might make.
Yeah, I feel like, um, I think Lucas and I, there are some professional parts of our background where we overlap, where we first met, kind of in the broader impact investing space, that were, rooted in a lot of things that you're mentioning, David. And even though, we've, our careers have progressed and evolved, I do feel like a lot of the values around like democratization or community participation or community governance, maybe we don't use those, or for me personally, maybe I don't use those exact terms anymore, but a lot of the underlying, to my previous comment, substantive kind of values and like approaches to things of like, how do you look at deals together, how are you in partnership with potential investees, or how do you kind of manage and mobilize other investors to kind of get behind a cause. I feel like there are a lot of kind of traits or aspects that I learned, from my younger years that perhaps reframed, but still kind of hopefully make me even more effective and impactful today.
Is there maybe a silver lining? I don't know that I really want to put it that way, but just say one of the effects of some of the pendulum swinging back and forth now is to kind of make the whole thing a little bit more accessible, both to other investors, as and they can see, like you said, some of these trends that are now becoming sort of just part of like any investment decision, and then also to other folks who may not be, in investment, but are maybe seeing, sort of the way that finance and business kind of plays into their concerns, and now can take advantage of some of the tools that impact investors have developed without necessarily having to buy into every piece of the reporting mechanisms and the management frameworks and everything that folks sometimes find, to be a little bit much, to be honest with you.
I would totally agree with that. I don't know that I have much to add. I think it has become slightly more approachable as an industry, and something that we talked about, offline is just that it can be somewhat harmful to have more of a purity test kind of mindset to this work. I'll say from a personal place, I was at a hands-off march recently, and I looked around and I thought, do I feel really represented here? Do I really feel a lot of common ground with everyone who's here? I was very critical of who was at the march, and then I had to check myself and say, but wait a minute, we're probably all voting similarly. We probably all want some similar outcomes. I should be thinking more about coalition building and how do I partner with these folks, and less about more of like a fractious identity. So it's a bit of a loose tie, but that's how I would react to that question.
Yeah, David, I appreciate this observation a lot because I think what you're maybe suggesting a little bit is about if things are framed or packaged or articulated in a certain way, that can thus enfranchise or potentially disenfranchise more people. Again, even if we're talking about basically the same thing. And just as a very clear example, like I told you before we started recording, I teach at a couple universities. One of the courses that I teach is at the City College of New York in Harlem, and I teach basically the entire continuum of kind of impact capital, from public equities down to kind of community based investment, to students that have, by and large, admitted to me that they've never heard of any of this stuff before. But they are in a public administration master's degree. They want to contribute to the social sector. Some of them have admitted to me as well. They were like, "What is this, and why do I have to take this class?" And they're like, even a couple weeks into it, they're kind of like, what am I doing here?" We just had a great final presentation at the New York Foundation, which I'm on the board of, and they presented basically 100% mission aligned investing strategy, terms that they had never heard of, in January, to a group of 4 to 5 fellow board members and investors in the space. And I can't tell you how many of them came up to me afterwards and just said, like, I didn't know this existed. So it's not that interest, they were opposed to it. It's not that they didn't find it compelling. It's just that maybe the language was inaccessible, or kind of the information wasn't available to them. So a good hope for me is that if this pendulum swing does kind of make it more broadly accessible, or other people can understand it, can we capture some more people like my students, more working class people, middle class people? And this comes back to our roots around participation, community governance. How do we kind of reach the people that are voting the same way that we are, that believe the same things that we do, and we don't get so tripped up on maybe some of a word or two that we may be interpreting differently.
Well, I think that's an excellent point because it always struck me that the, say, causes or issues or challenges that impact investors were taking up, affordable housing, access to energy, good schools, vibrant communities, small business financing, were kind of popular causes and things that anybody and people of all geographies, all sectors could get behind, but yet didn't really ever develop a kind of popular constituency, and so it left itself vulnerable when it would be demonized or politicized or weaponized, that somehow it was some elite affectation, when really it was responding to some of the things I think that pollsters and others, identify as real concerns of folks. And I wonder why, impact investing can't, and sustainable finance more broadly can't sort of have more of a base, a popular base.
Why do you this is such a oh man, I wish we had more time than we do. Can I was thinking about this today. Why, David, do you have any, or Lucas, but David, do you have any thoughts as to why? Because I totally agree. Like we are talking about the same thing. Like, and that's kind of how I frame it to people that I'm kind of trying to not indoctrinate, but just try to bring in a little bit. I'm like, these are the things that folks invest in my industry, and look at the legislation that you're trying to pass, or look at the nonprofits that you volunteer at, or the charities that you donate to. Like, there's going to be very similar mission statements or social issues that you're concerned about. But I'm flipping it back to you, David. What do you have any thoughts as to why we can't build that? Why we have yet to build that popular base?
I mean, what I come back to is that impact investing, and you said it earlier, it is investing. It became, or it could be pigeonholed, put it that way, as just another wealth management strategy for rich people, essentially for family offices. All the LPs that, other than the pension funds, which are, working people with their retirement savings, and thus have a maybe even a different, sort of slant on it. But if you're a wealthy family in a family office and you're trying to get market rate returns for your impact, you're essentially using it as a better wealth management, strategy. It might conform or align with your values. That's great, but you're not sort of fundamentally changing the economic system, that made you rich in the first place. So that, I think, is one of the kinds of, original sins, we've been calling them, in impact investing. And I don't know what the way out of it is, other than to, as you say, demonstrate that the outcomes are what folks actually want to see, which is, more capital flowing into communities that need it for things that people need to make their lives appreciably and measurably and kind of tangibly and visibly better. Lower cost, better housing, you know, happier kids, healthier kids, and more vibrant communities. And if it could get sort of reoriented around those outcomes, I think, that there is a chance to build a popular base around it. But I'm interviewing you guys, so you tell me. And particularly the folks that you're talking to, I know are sort of a broad cross section, trying to bring in, as I read the sort of set of interviews, trying to bring some voices into the conversation that may not have been, sort of centered or central, even in their own shops.
I'll give a couple quick examples of who we're going to be talking to this season to kind of illustrate that point. I think we bring on uh, investors in early stage startups who have the central premise that with more diverse check writers, you'll have investments flowing into solutions that serve diverse communities. We have folks at the CDFI level who are thinking about everyday businesses that sometimes pejoratively are called lifestyle businesses, but that's a part of the story too, right? Like someone who's starting a small retail company. We have folks that talk about fundraising. You mentioned LPs. That's a whole other part of this equation. Is how do you effectively relate to and pull capital down from places where it's traditionally accrued. And we also talk to folks that are doing things radically differently. We talked with uh, first episode with Todd Leverett, who's thinking about how to apply some learnings from private equity and private credit and mezz debt and apply that to worker ownership models and worker conversion. So it's a range, and I think that the reason why we did that is to showcase that this can be for everybody. This is not a sliver of the conversation. It's a way of thinking about how to move capital across the spectrum. But yeah, Eric, anything you'd add about that?
Another thing that really ties it all together, and David, it maybe goes to your original sin comment, is that Lucas and I we really enjoy talking to these people. Some of them are friends, some of them are referrals to us. We just get to build a relationship and a community with them over a conversation. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but I really come away from it those conversations at large is people, they did not get into this work because of the original sin. It's, if you listen to the conversations, it's so interesting to see people's origin stories, and we give that a little room to breathe. Where people say, last season someone was like, "I was an anthropology major," or like someone will talk about basically like we had an episode about retirement savings, and someone talked about like, oh, in their culture, this is what it meant to save up for retirement, or their grandmother taught them that. Like these are very heartfelt, kind of like personal stories, and I think it's because David, to your point, people get into this work because they realize how important resources are, allocating, controlling, influencing them, moving them around, something that maybe they were not exposed to growing up because they didn't have an uncle or an auntie that were going to teach them that. But they realize this is one of the potential doorways to walk through to potentially get to the outcomes that you had pointed out that we all agree on. So far from the original sin, I feel like there's just this common theme that there's a lot of heart with our guests that they're like, how do we, I say get more gas to make the car go, or more more sunlight to get the car go, because we're really focused on the direction where we're going, and where we're trying to end up.
And just quickly building on that point, I feel like all of the guests that we've brought on are really focused on the job to be done and view capital as just a tool in their toolkit through which to do it. So that's what we're trying to do, is to open up the toolkit and say you can use a hammer or a saw or a screwdriver. It's all valid if it's helping you achieve or address the systemic issue you're trying to address.
Well, I think what the sort of flip side of all that is, which I love, is that you're opening up the imagination of folks of what their own careers might be, and that this finance thing, which sometimes might seem to be way off in Wall Street or way off behind them, in a boardroom that they'll never be part of, but that actually no, they can actually have a career in finance. They can move capital. They can actually make things happen with that tool that has been kind of mystified.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. And I feel like, Lucas and I, people sometimes ask us for like career advice and whatnot. And I don't know, Lucas, for you, but I feel like half of those people would come to me. They have a liberal arts background or humanities background, and they're like, I just need to like clear the deck. And the first thing is, I don't love Excel. And I'm just like, okay, like, thanks. I'm glad I got to know that about you. But like, there are so many other functions, and why to some of the episodes this season, I'm so excited. We're going to be talking about like impact measurement and management, as well as like investor relations, things that I think measure really well over to people that are researchers, data scientists, social workers, project managers. Like, so these are things that, you do not live in Excel or in calculations, but they're absolutely integral to the kind of the industry of moving capital. And how can we, to David, to your point, how can we kind of broaden and expand what people would consider they could contribute to the space?
And I think what Eric and I both learned in our MBA programs is that you can very quickly learn the Excel tools and techniques to do the quantitative analysis. What's a little harder to teach is some of the EQ, some of the coalition building, which is as critical to being in an investment role.
Yeah, what I try to say is that, I think I'd rather teach someone Excel than empathy, as empathy is just in the bones and the DNA of all of our colleagues. Hopefully, me and Lucas, all of our guests, and the people we respect. The empathy is just kind of from lived experience and decades. But to Lucas's point, like, you can learn software programs, you can learn other programs, but it's just hard to rewire kind of like what your values and what motivates you day to day.
Well, I'm delighted to hear both of you say this, because one of the categories you didn't mention is journalists, who also was a
I love
liberal
you
arts
too. Don't worry.
who also was a liberal arts major, who doesn't like Excel, and so now I can out myself as a neophyte actually in finance, but hopefully able to chat with folks like you and follow along. So I want to give you each the sort of final word here, and maybe it is something that ties back to the narrative or the journey that you've been on, and something that either you wish knew earlier on, or something that you actually did know early on that now stands you in good stead and actually has become part of your repertoire as you move forward and move capital.
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like there's so many. Oh man, there's so many. But just to kind of, the first one that comes to mind is I did not very good in science in high school. Uh, but I feel like I come back to the scientific method a lot. I have not, created my own startup, on my own. I do happen to kind of launch a lot of things from V0 to V1 or V2. So I do think there's a lot of piloting and experimentation kind of, in my bones and what I gravitate towards. And I come back, to the framework of the scientific kind of method is because I think we need hypotheses, and then we need to run them, and then we need to see how they go. And a big part of that experimentation and risk taking is accepting that failure is one of the very valid outputs of things that we try. And I think that when I was younger, I probably didn't understand that, kind of experimentation and risk equation as much. And I wish that just kind of in the broader field, when we talk about impact investing or innovative finance, is like just really understanding and embodying, like, you will learn the most from developing a hypothesis and then putting it out in the world and then responding to that and iterating on it. Science knows this, venture startup Lucas will know all of this, but I do find in some kind of pockets of the kind of broader capital continuum, we just think we can be in a box and intellectualize the ideal solution. So like when I tell my students, I say you got to just go out there.
One insight that I picked up in my time at the Ujima Project is that when you're faced with a challenge and you're looking for the solution, it's best to decenter yourself and think about what the people who need that problem solved want. It's so obvious, but we came back to that again and again when faced with myriad specific questions around how should we structure this? How should the voting look? The answer is often think about sort of market pull, market demand, and the same thing is true in venture capital. You can't intellectualize product market fit. You need to do the research, speak to customers, understand what's needed, and then invest behind that. And I think Ujima was practicing the same central philosophy.
Thank you so much, Eric and Lucas. And we're going to be tracking along with Impacted and with all your conversations and with you too as well. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
That's going to do it for this Agents of Impact podcast. The latest season of Impacted is up at impactalpha.com/podcasts, and there's a link in the bio notes. Big thanks to Lucas, to Eric, to our producer Isaac Silk, to the whole team at Impact Alpha, and to all of you Agents of Impact, with gratitude for all that you do.